In this video, we're going to focus on some of the exterior aesthetics of the car. We're going to do some lighting upgrades, we're going to do some aerodynamics upgrades, cooling upgrades, and we'll show you guys all of that. We've got a set of clear marker lights, a rear finish panel, a spoiler, and then a set of air intake vents to install on the front. Sorry it's been a while since our last video. We're back full force into the build on this car. We want to be able to get it ready for summer weather, bring it out for a couple track days this year. We grabbed a set of the clear marker lights from Flying Miata. We'll put a link in the description for the parts that we got. Flying Miata actually released a limited set of the clear marker lights that had some kind of casting deformity. So we'll go through our install and let you guys know what we found that may or may not have been wrong with them. They are marked out of the box as rears. They are not marked left and right, so you got to pay attention when you're taking everything apart to where the locating pins sit to determine which side yours goes on. The only thing that you'll do is you'll undo the two mounting screws on the original marker light, remove the light bulb socket, and then pull the bulb out. And the Flying Miata LEDs actually just plug right into the factory bulb location. You get clear lenses with red LEDs for the back and then yellow LEDs for the front. If your bulbs are really stuck in the original sockets, these ones, I'd be surprised if they weren't 30 years old. We'll use just a pair of adjustable pliers to help kind of coax that bulb out. But aside from that, it should just be basic, easy hand tools. You don't need to remove the screws entirely. They've got little holders that will keep them in the lens, and it gives you something to pull on to get the whole lens out. And then to separate, we're going to just twist the bulb socket from its housing, and then that's free. So it's just a small incandescent 194 bulb. I'm just going to pull back this cover to be able to start the screws in there. That way your screwdriver, if it jumps, you run less of a risk of kind of scratching up your nice new housing. So all we're going to do now is plug in the wiring harness connector for the LED marker light into the factory bulb location for those 194 bulbs that we removed. So that's just going to slide in there like that. If you plug it in and it doesn't work, then your polarity is backwards, so you just unplug it and switch it. So just do a test, just make sure it works before you go for a drive. Yeah, so the socket was pretty tight on this one and it didn't want to engage, but if I turned it the opposite direction, then it seemed to lock in there. These don't need to be overly tight. You can crack a lens if you over tighten them. It's extremely satisfying just pulling the plastics off. Have a nice new part. In Canada, by law, a vehicle parked needs to have a reflector in the front and in the back. So side marker lights do two functions. They illuminate at night while you're driving. They also have reflective properties to them from the factory in Canada. So Flying Miata was pretty smart, so they include some reflective stickers. We aren't going to run these because this Miata is predominantly going to be a track car, but if a situation ever arose where, especially here in British Columbia, they're cracking down a lot on modified cars on the street, if we got a vehicle inspection order issued on this car, we would have to place reflective stickers somewhere on the side of the vehicle because we've replaced these marker lights now. So Flying Miata is actually pretty smart. They give 2 red and 2 yellow stickers, obviously red for the rear, yellow for the front. And these stickers are actually DOT, Department of Transport approved for use in Canada. So the original marker light lenses should have a DOT stamping on them somewhere else as well, right over here. That DOT, Department of Transport approved embossing, is not on the clear marker lenses. These actually don't have any reflective properties when they're not turned on. Up in Canada, just for your guys' information, legally you would be required to run a sticker. I'm just gonna throw these in the glove box of the car, and if something should ever arise, hopefully I'd be able to just stick them on quick, and the inspecting officer would pass the car that way. But otherwise, the Flying Miata,
as if that would be the only problem he'd have. Right?
That's true. This car is heavily modified. He might not like the fact that there's no interior. So, holy crap, that's bright. Still, oh, you know what, actually, the problem might just be, if you look real close, where the Flying Miata wires are kind of bent around, the width of the terminals on the bulb socket is too wide for where the wires are bent. So on a traditional incandescent bulb, you've just got the wires that kind of loop out from the filament, and they come through the glass housing of the bulb, and then from the factory they just bend them over the glass itself, and that's what makes contact on the inside of the socket. If we look at these Flying Miata connectors, you can see how the one is still really offset. So what might just be easier for us is if I spread these apart, bend this one out a little bit. So now if I just bend them out so that they're sitting outside of the pocket that was machined in there. Let's try that. Look at that. Okay, I think that's what the issue that Flying Miata had, was that the casting for the connector wasn't made wide enough to line up with the pins on a 194 bulb socket. So really, we saved a bit of money ordering clear markers from Flying Miata because they knew they had this casting issue. If you order the miscast ones, all you have to do is just spread those terminals apart. We got a set of the intake vents to replace the marker lights. Ours are full of pooling in the bottom there. Going with our black and white performance mods on the car, these are going to tie in really well, and they'll help keep engine bay temperatures down by providing some cool air through the front of the car. These are really simple. There's 2 Phillips screws on either side. Remove those screws and then replace the whole lens assembly with the intake vents. Disconnect the wiring harness connector. You just got to transfer the bulb socket from the original marker light over to the Carbon Miata intake vent. Twist to unlock it, pull it out. The tabs that lock it in are different size, so just line up the biggest tab to the biggest hole on the intake vent socket. Again, just install, twist to lock, plug in the connector, and then we'll use the original screws to mount it. Next, we're going to work on the back of the car. So we're going to reseal the taillights. They're leaking, water is actually getting into the trunk on the car. We're also going to replace the rear finish panel. So the finish panel is essentially just the body piece in between the taillights, and it's what houses the license plate. We're going to replace ours with a black one that we got from JDM MX-5, the Roadster model in Japan. We're going to take the taillights out, take the white finish panel off, reseal the taillights, put the black finish panel on, and then that'll kind of wrap up the back half of the car. Okay, so to take the taillights out, there's 4 10mm nuts on the inside of the trunk. So there's a rubber cover on one of the studs right here. So you want to take that cover off and hang on to that, because you can use these to plug vacuum lines on the engine. So don't get rid of any of those. So there's 2 on this side, and then you're just going to take off the 10mm nut there. There's another one there, another one down there, and then underneath this wiring harness tab, there's one more. Just like a hook tool to get in behind the wiring harness there to be able to pop it off without breaking the plastic. And then we'll just disconnect the wiring harness tab, push in on the lock, and then pull the harness back away from the lens. And then just the 4 10mm nuts. So then I'll push the taillight from the inside of the trunk to just release it, and then pull it off like that. Something loose and ours. So you can pull the bulbs out. At one point in time, one of the bulbs broke, and the glass is still inside the lens. It's gonna turn this upside down, and there's a piece of glass still in our taillight. Empty now. So one of the biggest reasons that we're doing this seal here gets super old and dry. If you look right over here, it's just kind of crumbling. So we were getting water penetrating inside the trunk. 99.9% of the time it's from that seal. So water drains off the trunk lid, and then it drops down into these channels. The seal stops it from getting into the trunk, but then they run straight down on top of the taillights. We ordered some replacement seals straight from Mazda. So we're gonna pull the finish panel off. There's a couple things you need to take off. We've got some license plate screws that are still in there from when we had license plates on it. Underneath your license plate, there's these 2 mounting screws. So you gotta get those off. On the finish panel, there's 2 clips in behind each taillight going down on the bottom section there. And then there's 3 or 4 behind, like, center section here. I'm gonna use my trim tool. So I screwed up. A couple of the tabs are actually nuts that transfer through into the body. So our finish panel I broke because I didn't know how to take this out. So there's some more 10mm nuts similar to the license plate lights. Learn from my mistakes, and just remember that there's hardware on the inside of the trunk you need to unbolt. Now we'll jump ahead to show you what I did wrong. Try to pop the panel away from that clip. So there's one more down there. It's going to be a little bit more difficult to get to. There's our finish panel. So we can see a couple spots broke. So there's 4 nuts on the inside of the trunk that you'll remove to take the finish panel off. So there's one here, there's another one right down here, and then the reverse on the other side of the car. This rear structure on the back of the finish panel that just helps support underneath the license plate is completely gone. That's just really incredible what a bit of rust can start to do. On the new finish panel, you can see we don't have any of the clips in here. And so some of them you're gonna have to transfer over from your original finish panel. Some of the clips are gonna break off. They'll come off on the finish panel, or like in this instance, a couple of them stayed in the body. So you need to remove those clips from the body, otherwise they'll be in the way. So ours actually broke. So the way that it's supposed to look is essentially just like this. So there's a tab with a stud welded to it. That would slide into this location. So on our new finished panel, we can transfer a couple of them over that didn't break. So that one will sit roughly in that location. This one will sit roughly in this location. We will contact our Mazda supply and we'll order 2 more that I broke over on this end. But for now, just to get the finished panel installed, we're gonna install the remaining clips. Mazda can actually provide you with all the necessary clips and hardware. So there's one that slides in right in the middle of the license plate. So one there, and one behind the other tail light. So the Mazda dealer that we had dealt with told us that there were 3 of the smaller black clips that we've replaced in these 3 locations, and that there's 4 of these larger clips. It doesn't look like on the replacement finish panel or our original finish panel that it actually uses those locations. There's a little piece of plastic that's actually blocked off installing the clip there. And when we look on the body of the car, there aren't holes anywhere in the panel where those clips would have gone into. So it looks like on our early generation of the NA, it uses 3 plastic clips and then the 4 bolt-in locations. So we just washed up the back body panel of the car with just some hot soapy water. So now we're going to install the finished panel on the car. So what you got to do is while you're installing the panel, you're watching for a couple things. On the inside of the panel, those studs can slide back and forth. So you need to line up the stud with the hole and line up your clip with the holes that they're sitting in. Line up the holes for the 2 screws that we took out, as well as the clip here, and then same thing on the other side. Line up your stud and the clip before you snap the panel into place. There we go. I really like the way this looks so far. We'll see how it turns out after the lights and everything are installed. Installation will be the reverse of the removal. There should be 4 nuts on the inside of the car. Right now, we're only going to use 2 until we get the replacement parts. There's 1 nut right there, and then there's another one on the other side of the car. Right there. And then there would be 1 more right here on the outside edge of the taillight. Same thing on the other side of the car, but we'll replace those later. Last thing for the finish panel is replacing the 2 screws that are hidden behind the license plate. Ours were these white painted Phillips head screws. On this car, I like to replace most of our hardware with the tapered kind of fender style bolts. So we're just gonna wipe down these tail lights, get some of the dust and mildew off that's collected over the last like 28 years. Now we're just gonna replace those seals and get the tail lights installed back on the car. We've got those seals that we picked up from Mazda. These are universal. You can see they both got the same part number. So it doesn't matter which one you put on which side. They actually give you an arrow to show you which way is up. So we know this gasket then is gonna sit just like that. So I like to install them on the tail light first. That's the part that's gonna move, and you've got the studs here to hold it in place for you. So just make sure it's sitting pretty flat, and then you just slide the taillight back in place. And then the 4 nuts from the inside. Just get them installed hand tight first, and then come back and snug them with your 10mm socket. You're just tightening it enough to squish the gasket a little bit. 1 turn past snug. So once you get it to snug, go half and 1 turn on all 4. Redo all your wiring harnesses and the retainers. So we've got 1 plastic clip that goes over this stud. Here, it just pushes on. 1 more on this end. Again, that just pushes on, and then plug in your taillight harness. Next, we're going to move on to a Duckbill spoiler that we picked up for the rear deck lid. I think it's similar to the Garage Very. We're going to hardware mount this. We're going to hold it into place and then mark our holes with a permanent marker, and then we'll come back, center punch, drill them out. You can reference back to our last video when we did the door cards to see how you go about installing some nut certs. Okay. So then we're gonna find the center of our pen marks there. And with our center punch, we're just gonna mark the center. The paint on this car is so old, it's kind of chipping when we do the center punch. It's okay. That one seems way higher. We noticed that the hole on the passenger side was way higher. So what we actually did was measured from the bottom of the trunk lid up, and then we just used the same measurements on the other side. So this just goes to show, measure once, measure twice, measure 3 times, as many times as you need to before you drill or cut whatever it is you're working on. So we've got some structure under here, but there's lots of clearance in between where our holes are gonna sit. You're gonna use a pilot size drill bit, so one significantly smaller than your finish hole size. We're gonna install M6x1 thread pitch holes. It's the same as the majority of the smaller sized hardware on this car. And we're gonna use the same fender washer bolts that we have everywhere else to mount the spoiler. So the M6x1 nut cert will have a finished drill bit size of almost 3/8 of an inch. So that's the drill bit we're using. Just test fit your nut cert, make sure it fits in the hole and that you've got a bit of play. So again, you guys can refer back to our door card video about how to do the rib nuts. Rib nut cert, it's kind of the same thing. This one is just a generic rib nut tool, and you'll install the rib nut onto the correct arbor for the tool, and then place the rib nut in the hole, compress it, with the tool, and then remove the tool, and there's one installed nut cert. This one hole you'll see at the end of the time lapse. What happened was my drill bit was drilling straight through, and then it actually contacted the metal chassis underneath, and it twisted the drill bit and kind of carved the hole oversize. So I just took a file down the edge and then just kind of shaped the hole back into a round shape so that the rib nut would fit. That one worked out fine in the end. We're gonna use the same fender washer style bolts. We got the finish panel and the spoiler installed. I'm really happy with how these turned out. The solid mounting of the spoiler was definitely the way to go, as opposed to just using the double-sided tape. We might come back and add some double-sided tape later just to seal the water from being able to penetrate through those bolt holes, but I'm ridiculously happy with how well this looks. We also got the air intake vents done. These just really change the whole look of the car from the front. It gives it a lot more of an aggressive view, and that black and white theme, we're now thinking we're going to name this car Project Track Panda. Remember, if you like the video, like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time. Thanks, guys.